Hello everybody, today we have John Escobar here on the line. Hello John, what's going on?
Hey, how are you, Rock? Very nice to be with you.
Fantastic. John is actually one of our early adopters, actually one of very early endorsers that got into the game about half a year ago, I think.
hmm
And we shipped you the S4 model of the headphones and also the early prototype of the BSC Pillow. Thank you for joining in and thank you for all the feedback that you've given us. But let's start with you. So, who is John? Where do you come from? How did you get into this music industry?
How did I get into this crazy life? Well,
Yeah.
I'm originally from Colombia, South America. I was born in Colombia. I grew up all over South America, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, and then I spent some of my formative years in East Africa. Um, so really, to me, that's sort of the where my music formation really took place. Just being exposed to all of the different cultural diversity around the world is a huge musical education right there. Um, I I've been professionally in the music industry for about 18, 20 years now. Um, but I've always been music's always been a part of my life ever since I was a young kid. But it was really about 18 years or so ago that uh, I said, you know what, this is what I'm gonna do. At that time, I thought that being on this side of the glass of the music world was the that was my version of a steady job, a safe job, because I'm a guitar player. I'm a guitar player and drummer, and I thought, you know what? I'm not going to be the next Jimi Hendrix, so let's do something safe. And studio work seemed like the safe thing to do, which, it's gone well for me. Um, but yeah, like many of us, I got my start. I sort of got the exposure to the studio world by being in a band, and like you were just telling me, trying to make a recording with my band and failing miserably, and going, you know what? There's a lot more to this than it looks. So I want to learn about this.
How does the approach to music or the music industry differ when it goes, like from Western to Europe to I think you mentioned Bolivia as well and so on?
That's an interesting question. Professionally, I can't really speak to that more than being in the US, and I've done some work in Europe. Uh, so Africa and South America are sort of untouched territories for me. But just from the musical perspective, um, in some of these cultures, the production side of the music business is still somewhat undiscovered. They're not quite as exposed to all of the latest technology that we have on our sides. So I feel like it's maybe a little bit more organic in some ways still, and sort of um, uh, uh, you know, production value wise, they're still catching up. I'm in touch with some people in Colombia and in some other parts of South America, and for sure, especially when we get into sort of the more cutting edge side of the business where we're at right now in terms of immersive audio and surround formats and all of that, they're they're not quite there yet. You know.
Mm, absolutely. Can we talk about Berkeley as well?
Sure. So I've been at Berkeley for about, I believe this is my fifth year. I've been on the music production and engineering faculty for roughly a year. So I went into Berkeley 5 years ago as the head engineer for the writing and technology division of the college. Um, and in that position, I was working with a lot of the curriculum, but also visiting artists, and doing special projects around the college. Um, and then prior to going to Berklee, I was the director of an audio production program for a Boston University College of Communications affiliate satellite school. So yeah, that's a little bit of my higher education background there.
Fantastic. So when did you first time got into the 3D audio and surround sound and basically Ambisonics that are starting to emerge everywhere these days?
Sure. So about I want to say 3 years ago, perhaps. Because here in Boston, just across the river in Cambridge is, well, actually, it's not in Cambridge anymore, but we have Harmonix, the video game company that makes Rock Band and all of these games. And so about 3 years ago, they approached some colleagues of mine at Berklee and I, because we had begun testing some of the newer microphones that were coming on the market, some of the Ambisonic microphones like the Core Tetra and the Brahma. Obviously, sound devices, the sound field mic has been around for a while, but that's the $20,000 version of the mic. And it was only about 3 years ago that these companies started making sort of the more approachable formats of these microphones. So we had gotten our hands on some of these and had been doing some testing. And so Harmonix found out, and they approached us to sort of help them figure out. They were at the beginning stages of Rock Band VR. And so we went in to do some tests with them and try and figure out if and how they could use this new thing of immersive audio and Ambisonics in their Rock Band VR game and how that would work. So that was really what sort of kickstarted me thinking about immersive audio seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. When it comes to Ambisonics, there's so much material you can read about it. There's actually a video that you made for Berklee, which we're gonna pop in here just in case nobody's seen it yet from our community. You explained the basics of it and so on. But what I'm missing in all this information is the application part of it. How to actually use it and what you can actually make with Ambisonics, and at the end of the day, how to monetize it, right? And
sure.
So can we touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So funny that you mention the application part of it, because this past Sunday we just released a 6th video in that series that is really taking this Facebook Spatial Workstation and putting this project that I've been guiding you guys through into practice and showing you how to route things, etc. Yeah, I think one of the exciting things about immersive audio in general, immersive media, is that we're at the forefront right now. We're discovering new grounds every day, and so how to create and then how to monetize those creations and even how to distribute those creations, it's changing every day. And for me, that's actually one of my frustrations, right? It's in the sense of, as I'm sitting here creating this content, educational content for Berklee, by the time we get through all of the editing and all of that, I go, oh, hey guys, this looks great, but it's actually already outdated. Yeah. There's a new version out there, right? So it's a really fast-moving medium, but it also makes it that much more exciting, because I think about the fact that in the history of really in the history of multimedia, ever since we decided that motion picture was going to have sound to it, video has always been leading the way, and sound has always been in the background. They go, hey, this looks really great. Now let's think about how it sounds, right? And with immersive media, especially with VR or anything that allows you to see picture on anything more than just a two-dimensional screen, um, right away we started saying, this looks cool, but it's not convincing.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't sound like I would expect it to if you put me in an environment.
Yeah.
And so it's the first time in the history of multimedia where picture and sound are side by side, figuring things out as we go.
Yeah.
And I think that that opens up an incredible world of possibilities. You know, we as the sound side of the world are getting to sort of tell the video side of the world some of the requirements that need to be there in order for anything to really work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting times. I think that we're very quickly seeing these platforms, you know, Oculus and all of the larger format headsets are very quickly realizing that we need to untether ourselves. You know, we need to take cables away because we're so used to being on this now, right? We're so much of a mobile culture, and so immersive media, being a cutting edge platform, has to very quickly go towards mobile. And if it doesn't, it's going to be kind of like kind of like 5.1 or 7.1 or any of these, you know, surround platforms where we love them. They're still really cool. If you can see, I've got speakers in the back of my studio for surround, but unless you're in an environment that has a room full of speakers, it's not really applicable, right? And so, you know, as soon as we can make virtual media more of a on-the-go kind of platform, I think it'll really take off, and we're at that stage, you know. And obviously having monitoring that is reliable and compact and just fun to listen to makes it all the better.
Yeah. So when it comes to monitoring, can you just mention that Ambisonics and VR in general has to get into the mobile space? There's, I think the other aspect of this is also the personalization of things. You know, the VR experience is personal; it's one-on-one. So that kind of brings headphones into this into this mix. And I want to know your view on the future of mixing in Ambisonics, right? So, for example, what's the difference if you want to do an Ambisonic mix using the speakers, and how does it translate to headphones, or basically just what's the difference in final application? So, in what cases, in what applications you would need the binaural rendering in headphones, and what's the application when you can just go with 5.1 or whatever speaker.
Sure. Yeah, so monitoring Ambisonics right now is a pretty tricky thing, and mainly because we're still, well, we've always known that that human hearing is an incredibly complex mechanism, and now that we're dealing with a media platform that is essentially trying to really emulate the way humans hear, and not just left and right and front and back, but also adding height elements into it. Speakers 5.1 or 7.1 or 10.2 don't quite cut it because you always have a gap in the sound field somewhere, right? So Atmos is a relatively new surround format that, in some ways, on a, you know, if you're in a room environment, that's going to cover it, assuming that you have an Atmos system that really completely covers all of your room with speaker. You know, you've got full coverage, but that does, if you're mixing to Atmos, that does change the way that your approach is from the creative side, because it's an object. Well, all of this starts becoming more of an object-oriented approach to mixing rather than sound field, right? Usually when we're in stereo, we know that we've got a preset, 180-degree spectrum, and we can place things within that 180-degree spectrum. So I think that in general, right now, the best approach is actually to decode everything to binaural, just because that actually, for us, that represents a closer relationship in terms of how we feel or how we sense sound around us. Um, and and so obviously that's much easier to do through headphones. You know, right now I would say very few people, if any, are creating immersive experiences on speaker platforms. Most people are going to headphones, which, you know, anyone who's been in the industry for any given period of time, if the first time you start realizing that you're going to have to mix everything in headphones, that's a little bit of an off-putting thing, because we're not used to that. Most of the time we're telling people, you know, I tell all my students, don't mix on headphones, because you may not actually be getting you know, full frequency, assuming you're not on good headphones. But now, you know, we're relying on headphones, and luckily now we have good sets of headphones out there that do give us sometimes actually better frequency response than some of the speaker sets out there. So it's really a shift in paradigm in terms of how we're monitoring things. It's quite interesting.
Absolutely. Let's go a little bit deeper, maybe a little bit too deep for this chat, but let's try it anyway. So when it comes to binaural rendering and specialization of sounds, the head-related transfer functions are like super important to it. And also I think that the head tracking part is like very important to really localize sound. So I want to know how these how can an audio engineer, you know, that works on a movie score or whatever application, how can he actually mix something that's gonna end up being played back on a headphones, maybe an Oculus or something like that? So what's the workflow, you know, how can you test these things if they are localized correctly and I mean specialized correctly actually, and if they sound good enough, if there's maybe some distortion going on in the sound and so on. What's the workflow? I'm really confused about this because there's not much on this topic that you can find online at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just mentioned HRTFs, or head-related transfer function, and the interesting thing that we're sort of still realizing about HRTFs is that it's hard right now. We're sort of globalizing that and saying, okay, well, as long as we add head-related transfer function to our localized sound and our binaurally decoded sound, then it should work. You know, when I turn my head, it's gonna turn with me, and head tracking will work, et cetera, et cetera. The thing about HRTFs, though, is that you and I both have completely individual experiences in terms of how we relate sound from the world to ourselves. And that has to do with our physical structure, right? Each one of our ears are sort of shaped a little bit differently, and you know, we've got more or less hair, and you know, our body mass is different. So what we're realizing is that custom HRTFs is probably the way to go, but how that adds yet another very complex layer to the equation, because already, as you're saying, it's a little bit tricky for me to know how I'm going to translate what I'm experiencing to what you're going to be experiencing. So now if I have to keep in mind that my HRTF is going to be custom for me and my physicality, and then that's going to have to translate to your HRTF and your physicality, we're not actually quite there yet. That's sort of like the next level that we need to get to. In terms of monitoring, right now, Facebook Spatial Workstation is actually a great tool. It's a free tool, which is also, that's a little bit unheard of in the audio world. We're not used to companies giving us production software for free. But really, that they're trying to do that as a way to gather data, to try and figure out how people are really creating this new media, and what it is that we really need out of them. And so actually in their new beta versions, they've improved the way that the video client is being hosted inside of whatever DAW you might be using, so that as you're working, you really do get to like plug in headphones. You can actually do it, they call it standalone or VR mode, which means that you grab your whatever headset you're currently working on, and you can actually observe your project in real time, and make a move in your DAW and then move your head around and see if it's working or not. And then beyond that, there are companies like Deer VR, which have come up with really great products where you can actually do all of your production, your creation, your content creation inside of your final environment, which that actually helps bridge the gap a little bit, because, for example, so I'm holding an Oculus Go here, and Oculus Go is using their own sort of proprietary speaker technology. I mean, you can add, you can sort of add your own speakers to this, but within these little bars that hold the head strap, they've got speakers in them. And it's not, you and I would say, well, that's probably not the best sounding speakers I've ever heard, but as a consumer product, you put that on and you go, hey, you know what, I know about sound and this sounds pretty good to me. So to someone that knows nothing about sound, that's going to sound pretty good. So if I know that I can use Deer VR or something like that and actually be creating the content wearing the thing that other people are going to be wearing in the meantime, that actually gives me a really good way to see how this stuff is going to be translating. But right now, yeah, there's definitely, as you may have seen in one of my videos, it's highly recommended that before you throw this thing out into the world, first you do this real-time sort of A/Bing and seeing how your project is really working or translating. And then I actually suggest that, you do a private upload. If you're doing a Facebook 360 video or a YouTube VR video or any of these platforms, that you actually do sort of a private upload so that you also see how streaming is affecting your project at that point, and view it that way.
Okay, so when it comes to music, so now we are talking about multimedia and gaming and all these VR things, but when it comes to music, we were used to, well, not we, probably we're a bit too young, but for generations, everything were just in mono, right? And then kind of the stereo came out, and it's now a standard. So what do you think? Is Ambisonic something that the music industry will take a chance on it? Are things gonna get remixed and remastered maybe? Or is this just something that's gonna have its own path?
So right now, I'm tempted to say that we're probably, as technology stands right now, we're probably not going to go back and remix and remaster things into Ambisonic formats just yet. But what I do think is exciting, and I'm certainly in that workflow, and I know other people are, is creating new musical content, just strictly musical content that is in these platforms. It's sort of it's actually a combination of the old school and the new school, because capturing immersive audio, capturing ambisonic audio as ambisonic audio is great. It's very, it can be very, I don't want to use the word immersive because that's what we're talking about, but it can be very all-encompassing. But at the same time, just like with our speaker formats, there are gaps in the spectrum, right? And so what we find, especially when we're dealing with just capturing music for the sake of music, is that putting one mic in the room and calling it a day is not, we're not quite there yet, because we're still missing a lot of the picture. Not to mention that when you go through the full conversion of capturing sort of your raw ambisonic information, and then you go through and convert that to the next format that you can actually use in post-production, it goes through a series of equalization curves. And so, anything that you do with equalization has potential for signal loss or frequency loss. And so you have to sort of deal with that. So the old school element in it is that we still have to put spot microphones, right? Our traditional miking technique hasn't quite abandoned us. And in fact, that's actually, I'm finding that that's a really nice marriage of the two worlds. And, getting to still use my, my Neumann KM84s with this, sort of space looking multi-capsule thing, is kind of fun and interesting. And, it's the old and the new. And I think of it a lot like, back in the day, we used to make recordings straight to 2-track, right? To phonograph. And so the approach was, okay, well, here's the thing that's capturing you, and anything that's going to be in that capture has to be positioned so that it sounds like it's somewhere in the spectrum, right? And my balancing has to be physically balanced and all of that. So I'm kind of treating it like that as well. So even in terms of how I'm using these new microphones, I'm kind of remembering old techniques of live to 2 tracks and multi-miking and spot microphone. And really with my spot microphones, I'm thinking of it more as I'm trying to capture essence more than anything, right? Because when we're recording, when we're making a traditional record, we are trying to capture the instrument's essence, but we know that we can manipulate things a lot. When we're marrying it to ambisonic content, because the ambisonic microphone is capturing your entire environment, that's capturing, your bed. And so your spot microphones are just like, okay, well, what does this vocalist sound like? What's the quintessential element? What's the quintessential frequency that we can't live without?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the format, so maybe we can just briefly explain the A and the B formats and how actually this transition is happening. What do you actually? I mean, when you kind of record something, you get the A format, right? So how do you translate it to a B format, and what's the preferable DAW that you can use to actually manipulate it or basically
Sure.
mix it?
So when you're capturing ambisonic content, depending on the type of microphone you're using, you'll be capturing what's called A format ambisonic audio. And that just means that you're capturing discrete channels coming off of your microphone. And so that's going to change. Channel numbers are going to change depending on what order of ambisonic microphone you're working with. So we've got, first order is a 4-capsule microphone. Second order is a 9-capsule microphone, and then we get to 16 channels, and we can essentially keep adding orders. Right now we're about to a 3rd order, and that's where we're stopping. But yeah, so you're essentially capturing raw audio discretely, discrete points of reference in a room, and usually we're dealing with cardioid usually cardioid capsules on the microphones that are all sort of working together. In a first order microphone, I like to picture that sort of as 2 Blumline configurations, on top of each other, because that's how you get the whole thing. and so then when you render that, we convert that to what's called B format ambisonic audio. And what you're really doing is you're adding EQ filters, but you're making it so that all of these discrete channels, because you've got overlaps in the polarity patterns across the different capsules, you start to merge those together. And actually, one of the interesting things about ambisonic audio is that you can really, it's a very malleable platform. You know, I can decide to make it a full sphere 360. So essentially, we've always known that as omni, right? Or we can make it one giant cardioid pickup, or we can make it a binaural, you know, bidirectional pickup, or, you know, really a multi-channel pickup, however we want to treat it. So right now, how you accomplish that is kind of dependent on what microphone you're using. So Sennheiser's Ambio has a little plugin that comes with it for free, and that helps you do the A to B format capture. There's sort of two traditional versions of B format, and that's the FUMA or FUMA and AmbiX or Ambix format. And really the difference there is essentially the B format is arriving at left, right, front, back, and up and down, or center position. Right, so we're getting a full sphere of sound that is then able to be decoded however you need to. And the difference between the Ambix and FUMA platforms is that in a first order ambisonics, you end up with W, X, Y, and Z, and that W is the center, the cluster of all of your capsules put together, or the omni capture, and it's really just a gain change. It's a gain differential between that center channel and everything else. So it's a plus or minus 3 dB between FUMA and Ambix.
That's interesting. So I mean, this kind of calls for standardization of formats and workflows and so on. So who do you think? And I mean, obviously Sennheiser is really strong in this area, but as well as DRVR and others, and Dolby, I think, is doing some amazing things.
Absolutely.
As well. So of course Facebook as well. But what do you think is going to come out of this? You know, because as we look at the music industry or the audio industry, at some point we just had stereo, you know, and then the formats were, you know, even the lossless formats are very few, and they basically all work in the same principle. So what do you think is going to happen with the Ambisonics? Are we going to get into maybe just sticking with the first order Ambisonics, and maybe the FUMA will kind of prevail more? And is this really going to go more onto the headphones kind of rendering and less to the speakers? So what is your prediction of the future in the next few years regarding Ambisonics? Well,
so I think that, as I mentioned earlier, we're definitely, at least for the time being, we're definitely looking at an immersive audio world in headphones. It's just the way to get it out to the consumer market the best, or the easiest, really. In terms of which B format is going to prevail, I would say Ambix seems to have already sort of taken a lead. FUMA was actually, I mean, as you might know, the concept of ambisonics is not a new thing. It's actually been around since the 70s. And FUMA was created, the concept of FUMA was created back then. So Ambix is already actually the new thing. I think what's really going to propel us forward is not necessarily the standardization of platforms, because we're already sort of there, and people are sort of preferring one platform over another, and development-wise, you know, all of these companies are sort of holding their own in terms of the the products that they're making available. I think what's really going to make a difference, and luckily we just saw it being released, is that once we standardize rendering levels or output levels of some kind, that's when all of these platforms really start to take off. So SMPTE actually just published at the end of September, they published some papers starting to discuss potential broadcast standardized levels for virtual media and ambisonic content and all of that, because that's what we've all been waiting for, right? Like, we're putting out this content, but it's sort of like, well, yours sounds louder than mine, and I'm not really sure if what the reason mine is distorting is because it's too loud or not, and I'm confused about how to actually monitor that meter that, because it's a 360 environment. So it's going to meter one way if I'm facing this way, and it's going to meter a completely different way if I face that way. So once we sort of figure out how to meter and how to standardize those metering platforms, I think we're really on our way to creating a lot more content.
You're a lecturer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're a mixing engineer, mastering engineer, and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
you do this at a studio or a label, or are you just freelancing these kind of things?
So I'm a freelance business with all of the projects that I do outside of Berklee. So Berklee is my 9 to 5 really. But yes, I work. So years ago, I was affiliated full time with some labels, and at this point, for the last, I would say, 10 or 12 years, I've actually been an independent business, and to me that gives me a lot of flexibility, because I can work on immersive content one day, and I can work on a record with an independent artist the next day. And I just finished some scores for another project recently, and I'm working on, so it gives you this very diverse world. It sort of assures that you're not going to be bored. And it sort of, to me, it really mimics the way that the industry functions right now, I think.
Yeah, I do want to touch on this. So when it comes to music industry and business and being a freelancer, there are certainly the technical aspect of business that you gotta be good at, you gotta have the skill set, but there's also the other part, which is just the soft skills, the people skills, to actually
Sure.
get well, a job and business going on. So I want to know how much time do you kind of spend in perfecting your skills on the technical side, and how much time do you dedicate to actually finding clients and maybe networking or doing some PR things and so on? What's the balance there for you?
I don't know if I can say that there's a balance, because it's just it's whatever needs to get done whenever it needs to get done kind of approach. But yeah, I would say that anybody that's having I don't want to call it a successful career, but an active career in the music industry right now, you sort of have no option but to stay really, really engaged in the ever-changing production value of the business. So, new gear, new software platforms, new forms of media, all of that kind of stuff. And so you're sort of a never-ending student in that respect. And then on the PR and marketing and networking side, I do focus pretty largely on that. I have someone that works with me on that. So some management and someone that sort of takes care of some of the multimedia for me so that I can devote a little bit more of my time to the music making side of things. But that said, I think that for all of us, it's really important to be engaged with your client base. You know, I'm a big proponent of sort of that client relationship and nurturing that client relationship, because usually that's actually what gets you the next gig, is the fact that you've treated every single client as uniquely and as wholly as possible, you know, fully, like made them feel like they're your only client at the moment, you know, even though you might be juggling various projects at one time. And I've always felt like that's really the one thing that gets me calls over and over again. It's not so much that I'm, you know, making posts on social media or have a website up to date or any of that. It's really the fact that I'm out there working. I'm always updating my body of work. You know, I tell everybody that I have this motto of I'm only as good as the last thing I did, right? In other words, if the last project I worked on was 2 years ago, then why? You know, what happened? So I'm very conscious of making sure that I'm always working on something, letting people know what I'm working on, and that's all part of sort of that's part of my networking, really. And you know, you get to a point in your career where it's sort of like it's sort of a rolling target of sorts. You know, it's like a ball just rolling down a hill, and you're hoping that you can sort of guide it at some point. But a lot of times, you know, if I look back on my career at this point, I've had all of these different stints in various different aspects of the music business, and I can't really tell you that I've been all that conscious that I was actually doing that. You know, it was just kind of like, okay, this is what I'm being called for right now, so I'm going to go this way, and then I'm being called over here, so I'm going to go this way. And eventually you sort of get to look back and see an overarching sort of trajectory to the whole thing. But you know, it's hard to keep that perspective because it is really so it's very much a juggle, you know.
Absolutely. It does leaves a question out on the open, and you know, many times as a freelancer, as a freelance audio engineer, or just anybody in the business, basically, you got to do all sorts of things, or you know, wear all the hats. But I'm very curious on your take on being a professional in one area or a specialist, you know. So what do you think is gonna come out of this, the Ambisonics and VR and so on? So we do have now the recording engineers, they are professional on that side. Then you have the mixing engineers that do just that and nothing else, and as well as mastering engineers. Many do everything, but there are, you know, real specialists there. I want to know, is this something that's going to happen in the Ambisonics world as well?
I think that we're actually probably going to be adopting Ambisonics into some of these specialties in their various areas. So I think that immersive media is going to, you know, the people that have focused their careers on being recording engineers, you know, capturers of sound, they will sort of migrate immersive techniques into their sort of bag of skills. I think mixing engineers are going to migrate immersive mixing techniques into their bag of skills, and I think same thing applies to mastering, especially once we've got these standardized these standardizations. That said, I do think that for people getting their careers going right now, there is a huge element that is you kind of have to a certain degree, you have to be able to do a variety of different things, and little by little, you get to sort of hone in on the thing that you're good at or passionate about, or just simply seem to be getting called for. But right now, we certainly live in a world where we have to be able to sort of do a little bit of everything within reason. I've always been a big proponent of being very transparent with my clients in terms of what I can do and what I maybe possibly could do or can't do at all, but especially when it comes to what I possibly could do, being very transparent of saying, I could do this, but I don't think I should, right? And that to me is sort of part of the nurturing relationship type thing.
Basically, just being a professional.
Yeah, just saying, yeah, in theory, maybe I know how to master this, but because I helped you produce this and we talked about musical arrangements and all of this kind of stuff, I probably shouldn't master this.
Yeah.
You don't want me at that point.
So John, you have our S4 headphones for a while now. What do you think about them? What's the idea that you like, and also what you hate about them?
So I've had the S4 system for a while now, and being a freelance producer engineer means that I'm always moving around. I'm never necessarily finishing, or continuing projects in the same environment. So I'm always on the lookout for tools that will make my job easier as I have to move around. And the OLLO headphones, first of all, are a system that I can rely on. They're comfortable. They sound good. They're fun to listen to, and they're compact. Right? It's a compact system that sounds good. I can't always take Pelicans with my favorite speaker, and so having favorite speakers that I can literally put into a backpack and get on an air is awesome. And you never know when you have to finish a project. Sometimes you think you're done with the thing, and you've planned a vacation, so you go off to the beach. And this has happened to me with OLLO headphones. I delivered a project. I went off for what I thought was a vacation, and I get a note saying, "Hey, this sounds great. Could you, ... And I go, absolutely. I plug in my OLLO headphones, I pop open the project, and I'm there. I'm ready to deliver, right? I can make the tweaks, and I know that what I'm listening to is actually going to translate. And to me, that's a really comforting thing, is knowing that the way that I'm hearing it is probably the way that someone else is going to hear it, assuming that they've got an environment that they can rely on. So reliability has been a key factor here.
So John, really, I really appreciate your time and the feedback and everything.